Hello and welcome back to the new Proscat series. I'm Prosper.
I'm David.
Hi, David. And, and today we are going to be doing some new content. Today we are going to be reviewing a movie. Very new concept for us here on the podcast. It's been a bit since we've done anything, but we're back. And today we're going to be looking at Puss in Boots 2: The Last Wish. So let's just jump right into it. So I'm really excited to review this movie. As an 11-year-old, I was disappointed in the DreamWorks and Shrek franchise. If you recall, they had the first three Shrek movies, but Shrek 4 was not very good. I had no desire in me to see another Shrek movie. I can't even barely remember the fourth Shrek movie. It was it was a fever dream. I think he became a human. There was a donkey, something like that. A gingerbread man. Yeah, fantastic. But not my cup of tea, nor do I think anyone's cup of tea. I think if you talk to anyone about Shrek, they will say that the fourth movie is atrocious. Um, and that movie came out in 2010.
Yeah.
And if we remember back then, other animated movies that were coming out in 2010 were a lot better than Shrek 4. To name a few, we had Rio with Blue, the blue parrot. Tintin, which is a super underrated movie. Kung Fu Panda 2, How to Train Your Dragon, the first one, Rango, and Tangled and Megamind. So that's like a lot of very good animated movies in a very short period of time. When I think back to my childhood, which was around that time, those movies I definitely still love. In fact, I think I saw Megamind like a week ago. And so Shrek 4 just didn't even come to memory, when you name those types of movies. However, a movie that does is the first Puss in Boots, which came out in that time period as well. It came out just after Shrek 4, and it was really, really good. It kind of saved the franchise in a way, but also kind of left the franchise in a lull. The movie, it had great animation, it had good characters, it had a good story. And as a kid, I loved it because when it came out, I was 11, and I was excited for the next one because I figured there would be a sequel. Right? They made 4 Shrek movies. Why would they not make 4 Puss in Boots movies? Especially because Puss in Boots was a lot better than the 4th Shrek film. So clearly there was going to be sequels, and I was all for it. However, a couple years pass, more years pass, and there's nothing about a sequel, and that left me very disappointed. I kind of grew up. I went through high school. I became a teenager. I went off to college. I started to adult. I got a job. I started avoiding taxes, things like that, all within the span of no Puss in Boots sequel. However, that all changed as of 2022 and into 2023 when Puss in Boots 2 got released. I remember when I first watched the trailer, I was completely in shock because it had been 12 years since the first Puss in Boots had come out, and I had almost completely forgotten about how much I loved that movie. And to, out of the blue, see a trailer for a sequel, I was ecstatic. I was super excited, and I couldn't wait for it to come out. It's kind of interesting because that, in the past 12 years, is the only Puss in Boots movie we've gotten, but it's also the only Shrek / DreamWorks content we've gotten, I guess, in the Shrek Cinematic Universe, if you will, um the SCU to rival the MCU. Um, that that was the only like I guess you could call it fairy tale story we've gotten in the past 12 years. So it was also super exciting to see all the characters again. Not necessarily the Shrek characters, even though they do hint at that towards the end of the movie. No spoilers there. But we do see Puss in Boots again, and we are in those kind of, I don't know if you want to call them grim fairy tales. I think they're pretty much grim fairy tales, or at least they compiled them in that book of theirs. Um, and it's a breath of fresh air too. It's a breath of fresh air in that it's a new movie in the DreamWorks franchise, but it's also a breath of fresh air because the movie is very different from the original. If you think a lot of franchises, they'll just keep making the same movie one after another. But this movie is different in a lot of ways. Um, the very first change you notice is that the animation is very different from the original Puss in Boots. The original Puss in Boots animation was a lot like Shrek, where they kind of just made everything clean, everything was fine. It was your basic computer generated animated movie, just like Toy Story or anything like that. This animation in this movie, while it's similar, it's made in such an aspect that it felt kind of comic booky. Um, I think when I saw the trailer when it came out, the very first movie I thought of was Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. That movie is full of a lot of action sequences, and one thing they did in that movie is during action sequences they would skip frames and also make an image last 2 or 3 frames, right? So you get kind of like this cutty, jumpy effect during action sequences. It's a really cool effect, and they did that in this movie. And they also changed the animation style such that it resembled that of like old fairy tale paintings that you would see in like a grim novel. Um, I I want to clarify, when I say grim novel, I don't mean like like scary, but like the Grimm brothers. I don't know if I don't know if people even know what those are, but that's where they get a lot of these stories from. Except for I think Shrek. That's a new one. But um, I do believe Puss in Boots was a grim fairy tale. Um, in fact, I don't think he was a Spanish cat. I think he was a French cat. But I digress. Um, so the animation was a breath of fresh air. The story was also new, but in the way it was similar because it's a grand adventure. In the first movie, they go on a big adventure to the floating castle to get the gold egg laying goose from the giants. And in that story, you start off and kind of like a George Lucas-esque storytelling way where you start the movie off with a story, and then at the end of that story, which lasts like 20 minutes, you start to get into the main story. Um, and that's how Puss in Boots 1 played out. There was something going on for like 10, 15, 20 minutes, right? And it ends, and then we start to get to the main story. And it's some big, large adventure, right? You're going off to a distant place to find a different, distant thing. Um, and this movie was similar, but there's a gap. So we do start off in uh, an already established story. We enter into a story that's already taking place where he's. I don't want to give too much away, but he's doing something. He's being the hero that he is. However, while doing that, he has he kind of loses his faith in himself. And the story is about him gaining that faith back, but also doing the normal story arc of going on a quest and getting a MacGuffin, if you will. But that's the second thing about the movie. There are a lot of themes in this movie. So I think it's kind of funny that there are a lot of fairy tales in this movie, but there are also a lot of themes with those fairy tales. So most children's movies, because they're children's movies, will center on like one general theme. Keep it short, keep it simple, because it's a kids movie. However, this movie didn't strike me as a kids movie, even though it was marketed as such. Especially, like I mentioned, I was 11 when the first movie came out, and now I'm almost 23, so that's a 12-year gap. So while they may market it to kids, I think they also understood that a lot of the kids who saw the original Puss in Boots are now young adults, which is right where I fall in, and I'm sure a lot of people who have seen this movie fall in, including friend of the podcast Blair Bean, who I went to go see the movie with. Um, Touching on a lot of themes, there's um, general themes, like the power of friendship and things like that. Perfect stuff for little kids. But there's also a lot more mature adult themes about, finding your place in the world, becoming who you are, not being afraid of 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 things that would normally scare you, kind of overcoming those fears. And this is simply because this is tied to the main title, The Last Wish. Um, in the movie, Puss in Boots is on his 9 life. They kind of play on the cats have 9 lives, and in the movie, Puss in Boots is on his last life, so he doesn't want to do anything. He doesn't want to endanger himself. Um, and the story is kind of him trying to wish upon a star that he gets his 9 lives back. And that goes on towards the end of the movie. However, throughout the entire movie, he's only on his last life, so he's kind of dealing with that, and also dealing with the fragility of his life. And I feel like those concepts are beyond 7-year-old kids. Despite it being an animated kids movie, I think a lot of adults can resonate with that theme and topic. Um, on top of that, though, it is also a kids movie in the fact that it's very lighthearted and funny. Um, there are moments where it gets very serious, and then it'll jump straight into a hilarious situation, or comic relief of some sorts. But it all plays out really well. And in the end, it's a really good movie. The only problem I have with it is that John Mulaney is not the best voice actor. Um, and he plays one of the villains in the movie. There are numerous villains in the movie because there are numerous themes in the movie. But he plays one of the villains, and I don't think he does a necessarily great job. And it kind of, every scene he's in, I kind of get pulled out of the movie because his voice acting just does not play the character. Um, I think everyone else does a fantastic job. But you know, you go from one scene where Puss in Boots is like lamenting about his um last life, and Antonio Banderas does a good job of expressing that emotion, and then you cut to John Mulaney and he's like, oh, I can't wait to get my hand on this cat, and it's like, oh, yeah, classic John Mulaney doing his John Mulaney voice. And it's like there's not it's like deadpan, and there's no emotion, and it really takes away from the movie. um Luckily he's not one of the main villains, and so you can kind of just push it aside. um Yeah, there's me trashing on John Mulaney again. But the movie, the animation's good, the themes, the plots, all great. Voice acting, except for John Mulaney, is fantastic. Um, and on top of that, the reception to it has been really good. I think a lot of people around my age, who've seen it have given very positive response to it. And so I'd say it's not a kids movie. And I recommend. I hope I didn't give too much away, but I recommend that you go see it as soon as possible. I think it's coming out on streaming services soon. Um, but yeah, I mean, to sum it all up, Puss in Boots 2, The Last Wish. It's a movie about a cat. But it's more than a movie about a cat. In fact, the cat is just one of the cats. There's actually two cats in the movie, and there's even a small dog that dresses up like a cat. Um, and Also, there's a giant wolf who's also the villain. And there's also a house full of hundreds of cats that Puss in Boots lives in for a little bit. And there's the three bears from the Goldilocks book. So there's three bears in it. And then there's Goldilocks, and there's other humans too. So actually, Puss in Boots 2, it's a movie about two important cats, a bunch of less important cats, a dog, a wolf, three bears, and a lot of humans. So it's a movie about a lot of stuff. There's a lot going on. But if you think about it, it's really just about a cat that likes milk and coffee and being Spanish. Yeah. I didn't pay my taxes this year. That's all I got, David.
I thought it was good.
You thought it was good?
Yeah, I thought it was a good movie.
Wait, you've seen it?
No. I just can't even hear you clapping. Okay. Thank you for joining us for the first ever movie review mukbang thing.
What's
Next
the
week,
mukbang part?
watch us play one-on-one Among Us.